So I figured we'd start by explaining why we started this podcast, but maybe we should do introductions first and say who we are, and then we can talk about the podcast and the whole thing, the whole movement as a whole, and then maybe the event that's coming up, and or maybe not, maybe something else will come up. But let's start there with
Sounds good.
um, who we are. And I guess, do you want to start with that?
I,
You,
I can, although, I mean, this is your show, so I'd like to introduce you. This is my boy,
yeah.
Paul Barton, whose idea this was, and I'm real excited and proud to be doing this, you know. Was there more you'd like to add about yourself, Paul?
Um, yeah, I don't really know. I don't really know that much about who I am yet. So
Ah,
maybe this is a, this podcast might help me figure more out about that. But I'm a musician who also is very curious about how to make the world a better place. I guess that's all anyone needs to know right now.
very cool. Like you can tell why I love this guy, right? Like we're supposed to be on introductions, and he dives into the deep end with this really deep philosophical thing right off the top. Anyway, yeah, okay. So I guess that means I'm to introduce myself.
Hmm.
Abojo, wabche shito dem, nimki beneshe nene andishnakas, niganichkan and dinki. Beketchwang ang dunjaba, chimekwidong inden da, unatamowak, ogichitwa kwewak, minwa, uh, ashkabewas, minwa, mishomas, in minwa, Anishinaabe, and Dao. Um, my English name is Kevin Best. I'm a white man, as everybody can see, of mixed heritage, but through adoption, formal adoption, not a legal colonial structure adoption, but a formal ceremonial adoption by a man named Ford Sony in Walpole Island. I self-identify as Anishinaabe. Good to be here. Hello.
Hmm. Um, I am I am curious about adoption, and I don't know,
Mm,
maybe you could speak a little bit about that because I know um, there's been some public debate about what people claiming to be native and they're not really native and stuff like that. But
right, right, right,
I'm not
right.
sure
No,
if
that's a really good
adoption.
question. Sure.
So like,
You're
how
talking about
does?
the blue elephant named Jordan Peterson.
Well, no, there's been others. I don't know the full story, but it was something about a healing lodge that someone. Anyway, I don't know the full story, but
Well,
it's in
it's
Canadian
tricky business.
politics.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
this I think the term that the young academics I know use, I think it's identity politics. So I
Yeah.
think when we have this conversation, there's two lenses that we're going to have it in. And I'm not an expert in either lens, but I'll tell you a little bit of what I know. Is there was an Anishinaabe man, Potawatomi Anishinaabe man called Butch Elliott, and Butch was from Neashingneming or Cape Croker, and he's been gone now 10 years, I guess. And he told me about that there was a tremendously, and this has been confirmed. I'm just giving credit because he was the first guy that told me the a long history of adoption and acceptance by the Anishinaabe people. So in northern Wisconsin, there was a bunch of orphans that were adopted. So that's thing one is there's a tremendously long history amongst the Anishinaabe people of adoption and acceptance, where people that were orphaned or people were taken in. And so even if you're not biologically Anishinaabe, you were completely accepted into the community. You were given, you were, as I was, taken in and adopted by somebody and given a name and had all the full responsibilities and rights, right? So, hmm. That's thing one. I mean, so that separation I had lunch with an Anishinaabe Kwe, which means woman in our language, Anishinaabe Kwe, and an Anishinaabe person who said that if you have one drop of Anishinaabe, you can claim it, and that's what the Haudenosaunees say, right? But at the end of the day, I mean, with the greatest of respect for her, I don't agree, and I don't think that's the teachings. I think that identity is cultural. Identity is not biological. And and my teachings say that we live in the time of unity. So again, there's the conversation of I say I'm a white man of mixed heritage because I have to be careful in the times of Joseph Boyden is one of the names that might come up around identity politics or Jordan Peterson. I need to be careful, to be honest. I don't want to be claiming something I'm not. Frankly, I don't know what all my heritage is. My family history said we had native blood in us. I think there's native blood on the other side, but I can't prove anything. I haven't got the DNA test done. But it doesn't matter because I'm accepted as an Anishinaabe in the Anishinaabe communities I work in the indigenous communities I work and travel in, from the East Coast to Central America, by Cherokee Nation, by many others. So I know who I am. The spirits know who I am, and other indigenous people know who I am. The only people that, for the most part, question my identity are non-native people. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, it was a
Yeah.
long answer.
No, that's good.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was. And I'm sure
So I
there's.
got to add one more piece. I do
Okay.
not have a status card, right? So adoption does not mean that under the colonial government of Canada that I am considered First Nations. That's a whole separate identity politics conversation that we can have sometime.
Yeah.
Whether I'm legally have status as a First Nations person in this country, which I do not. I have no status. I'm a whatever they
Mm.
man with a country. No, that's whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah, maybe we can talk more about that later. I'm sure there's
Sure.
some stories about how that came about, and that might be interesting.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. So maybe we can talk about the whole movement or thing that we're trying to do in the world that this podcast is a extension of. And I don't know if that's a pretty broad question, but where does that take you?
For another sip of smoothie to think about it for a second. Um, I got to watch the ums. So for those of you out there, I just noticed I ummed. Let me try to not here a lot. Unless, of course, we're going to chant an aum together, in which case it'd be cool, right? But um, there I did it twice. Paul, every time I put up my finger or something at me, I do not want to be umming
I don't
throughout
know.
the entire podcast.
I might not notice.
Uh-oh, that's rough. That's rough. I will try to be more self-aware. There he is going to making me aware of making me responsible for my own behavior. It's most disconcerting. So it's hard for me not to talk about that without talking about myself. And I come from a family for multiple generations who were different than most in that their concern was not only personal fulfillment, or maybe I should say they saw the way to personal fulfillment through service. It was from a Christian background, but not of a saving souls, but of varying types of what was called the social gospel, of trying to make people's lives better. And then in my parents' generation, they weren't overtly involved with churches in terms of their work, but I was raised with this notion of helping professions or being of service. So just being a guy that follows the rules and does exactly what I was told all the time. Wink. I early in my life, I say to people, and I think you've heard me say, is that I'm not a medicine man, or I'm not a holy guy. I don't have any university degrees. I'm not a fancy guitar player like you. But there's one thing that I can say that I'm pretty good at, and that is the conversation that I've been asking of something bigger than me for over 40 years, of how to save the world. When I gave my life to Spirit, and that's a story how that came to be, but when I gave my life to Spirit 43 years ago, the common notion is that we'd lost the 60s revolution. So that was 1975. And we were in the wake of the whole 60s thing. And people said, we lost the 60s revolution. All you can do is be a good person and help the people around you. And I said, yeah, but what's the one thing I could do? Because I'm a unique individual. So what I can do is different than anybody else. So I haven't really answered your question, but that was the starting point of a 40-year conversation or journey to get us to this conversation here on December 23rd here in 2018. Is my life was organized by something, an intelligence, forces bigger than me around that question: how do I save the world? I'm going to stop because that didn't really answer your question at all, but didn't I have to say that?
Yeah. Um, so,
I have a question for you.
okay.
When did we meet, and what brought you there? And am I allowed to do that? Like, is this an
Yeah,
interview? This is not, it's a dialogue or anything?
this can be a dialogue, yeah. Um, I don't know if you've heard, maybe I'll give a little more details than you actually know, so it'll be interesting for you. I had a job doing renovations right when I graduated because I needed to pay rent, and I got to the point where I was a little bit fed up with my boss, so I quit that job. And I had a bunch of free time, and I had heard about activism and climate change and stuff, and I tried to find different groups to join or whatever, and I had all this free time, so I joined 350, Toronto 350, um, and they are a climate change activist group. Um, so I, and then that's where I met Louis, my friend Louis,
Our friend Louis.
our friend Louis, and then Louis and I both kind of got disillusioned by that activist scene. We both stopped going to meetings for various reasons. Maybe we can talk about that later, but and then they had another meeting after we had both left. They had a meeting about mental health and activism, and both Louis and I went, and during the meeting we actually talked about things that I'm interested in, like spirituality and the personal side of things, which I'm curious about. And so Louis and I connected. And then that's when he invited me to a ceremony that you were leading, a fire ceremony, a talking circle ceremony. And that's when I met you. So I met you at a time when I was disillusioned with like regular activism and sort of discovering that personal growth is in some way a form of activism somehow. I still don't know how to fully explain that, but I,
Yeah,
I,
this is really great. This is really great. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry,
like,
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
yeah. So because we talked about that in the fire circle, I think most people were talking about their own experience and talking less about like brainstorming about how to save the world kind of thing, because it's more of a sacred space, and people were talking about their experiences, and I really liked that. And somehow I had the idea that my own personal growth would help the world in some way, and then I could focusing on that would be good for the world. So anyway, I think that's
Well,
where.
that's really rich. That's really rich. So one of the things that Paul and I had talked about when we've been talking about these podcasts for a long time. So this actually, I just want to go woohoo and give us a shout out, because this is a culmination of, I don't know, 8-month conversation. I think was it last summer we started. It goes back to when you said you wanted me to argue with Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
and I wasn't down. But so there's three things that I want to pin coming out of what. So no, hang on. So what I'm saying is that we had talked about possibly doing an opening for these, or smudging, or opening up this to be somewhat of a sacred space, and we didn't do that. But the reason I mention that is I very much feel, these are words I don't normally, well, I do privately, but I feel the dynamic spiritual quality of this conversation. And by spiritual quality, I mean that there's a field that is created between Paul and I, in my belief, in the way I look at things, where I asked a question and just you could call it randomly, or you can say intuitively. I wanted to ask Paul a question. And out of that, this rich, fertile material for dialogue has come up. So there's three things. One of which is you can make a pin of this, or make a note to talk about a critique of some more critique of 350.org, specifically the climate march in New York City, and some of the stuff I know about that. Not a lot, but just a little anecdotal stuff I know. Thing two, I'd like to talk about, and I'm going to turn it back to you and ask you what order you want to do this in. I just want to clarify some of the terminology you used around the description of what Louis and I branded as "Yo, what's up," which was the gather. No, sorry, not "Yo, what's up." So that's a complete lie. It's nothing. It's "Yo, tribe up."
Yeah.
Around that gathering around the fire, because ironically, the intention was entirely about social change, but
Yeah.
to have those conversations in an indigenous way. And so that's the second thing I want to talk about a little bit. I won't go into any more detail. And then the third thing I want to talk about, whether we do it now or in a subsequent podcast or whatever, and to those of you, if anybody else ever watches this is all an emerging thing. We do not know where this is going, or what we're doing, or whether anybody will ever see this. But the third thing is I want to talk about the thing you hit on that's really important, by the way, the teachings I carry and what I believe about social change, which you said is that personal growth relates to it, or mental health relates to it, or let's pull the lens back and say individual aspect of social change is so often overlooked in the activist slash social justice slash political change worlds. And that's a conversation to have. And there's two aspects to that. One aspect is the critique of what's out there. And and the other aspect is to talk about the importance of doing it differently through making ensure that the foundational piece of trying to make the world a better place is individual, not individualism, but the individual building block cell of you and me is the most important piece. Without getting us in alignment with, we get all cosmic on it, but without getting us in that piece taken care of, we will not create the change that we're hoping to create. Okay, I'm done. You're over to you.
All right. So, okay. I've got a little notepad here, so I wrote those three things down.
Right.
I'm curious, maybe we could talk about the the indigenous part of this and why that's important.
Well, okay. Good question. What is it? What does the word indigenous even mean, right? I think if we Google it, or look it up in an actual dictionary, we'll find that it talks about being of a place, the original thing to a place, right? And in the context in which I'm using it, it's come to mean much more. And I think generally in the wider conversations, it's taken on a certain meaning. Over the time since I came home to Indian country, and if this ends up being an audio cast, I put quotations around Indian country. How the quote native people of quote Canada are referred to has changed. The legal word that was being used 20 years ago was Aboriginal, and I think actually that's still the legal term under the federal government. And sorry, my phone dinged. I'll just turn that off. And sorry, Paul, talk about it for 1 second, and I'll just say I gotta just turn this off and say something. I guess I don't have to, but it's my daughter, guys, and I always put my kids first. So I could have got you talking, and then I could have done it. That would have been politer. I could have thrown a question back to you. That would have been smoother, and then nobody would have known that I did that. And I was so unprofessional. Okay, the phone's turned off, and you've got me. You've got me. So the word then was Aboriginal, and I remember somebody saying to me, "Well, Aboriginal refers to Australian Aborigines. It's a very specific thing for that word is for the indigenous people to Australia." So what has become the common? So then it was native was the thing to use for a while, right? I mean, because originally it was not originally, but the colonizers called everybody here Indians because of I think was it Christopher Columbus being so confused and
Yeah.
thinking that he was in India when in fact he was just in the gone on a Caribbean vacation, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a really bad joke, guys, because what Christopher Columbus did in the Caribbean, it was anything but a vacation. It was horrible and awful, and that's people probably may or may not know that, but that's where they make another pin about that. Whether I know about that, like the behavior of Christopher Columbus when he arrived, the way in which the indigenous inhabitants of those islands were treated. I'm going to throw out one gruesome, horrible tidbit. The way human beings were shipped back to Europe as to eat, like the treatment of all of that and the legal basis on which he was even thought it was legal what he was doing. All of that needs to be discussed at some point if this is for audiences that people don't know about the real history of this. Indigenous. Indigenous now refers to people that still have some sense of their original instructions. We talk about having received original instructions from a creator. If you want to use more of your culture's point of view, and I even though I'm of your culture, I make that distinction. Because I try to live in an indigenous worldview. If you would say that is people who are in relationship with all of creation and with the unseen world, people that are living in harmony with the earth and natural law. So by all of creation, I mean all the plants and animals and each other, and then the unseen world. That's my kind of working definition of indigenous.
Hmm. Yeah. And so why is that? Why is it important for
Ah,
what we're doing?
right. Good question, Paul. Because it's funny, I had a dream about this the night before last. The way this world is run is not working, right? It's too. I mean, we can talk about it. I don't think anybody watching this would argue, if anybody does watch this, anybody watching this would argue that we're in crisis as a species. We're in crisis not only, and because part of the crisis that we're in as a species is because of the crisis we've created on this planet, which indigenous people call their mother, our mother, the earth. The damage that we have wrought to this planet by non-indigenous ways of doing things, what I choose to call the patriarchal ways of doing things, is brought humanity and most of the creation to the brink of extinction. It's a pretty heavy duty statement, but those are, in fact, where we are. I'm sitting here in a beautiful, comfortable home, at least compared to most of the world's population. It's not beautiful and comfortable compared to North American standards, but it's pretty nice. I'm warm. I got a comfortable chair and all that stuff. But the reality is that we're all in this is the 11th hour. I sent you something by a man that I choose to receive spiritual mentorship from, says that he spoken as a statement of fact that we're in the time of the great extinction. I think that's maybe a reality that most of us don't want to actually accept, that it's just a fact. I'm still operating under the illusion that we can turn it around. I shouldn't say illusion. I am still operating under the belief that we can turn it around and hoping for the best. But I'm actually, if I'm being analytical, and since I got that email a few days ago saying that we may already be at a point of great extinction. So you asked the question, why is that important? Because I believe the only hope for the continuity of life on this planet, the only hope for the continuity of life in any way as we know it on this planet, is to re-indigenize.
Mm-hmm.
Took me a long time, but I got back to your question with the soundbite at the end,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and with the definition of indigenous that you gave, it seems kind of obvious because indigenous is people who are in touch with the living within the natural systems of the earth and living in balance with that. And there's a whole lot of people and cultures who aren't living in balance, so it seems so obvious that you can only be out of balance for so long before you tip over. And so
Yeah, nice.
we need balance, right?
Right. And
And
that life just
obviously
moves with beauty
there's
the way you told me how to. Yeah, sorry.
lots of like science about that and the different ecological systems that are um, experiencing this out of balance state, and
Right.
the extinctions that have already occurred because of humans and the extinctions that are occurring, and what that means, and how every bit of life has a role, and destroying bits of it is not good for the whole, and all of that stuff. But
Yeah, so we know it's bad, right? But I
yeah.
sort of want to, we know it's bad and what you're talking about. I just want to add one more piece. Is so you're aware, I'm in the middle of writing something that may be a book. It's big. It's longer than an essay. It's longer than a blog post, and I think it's probably, we can say it's a short book. And it's to talk about the thing that we're talking about in these podcasts. But what I talk about is that the symptoms of that out of balance, right? Like, I mean, if you talk about, what I say is, by being out of balance, we're also separated. And I talk about four aspects to that separation. We're separated from ourselves. Like you said, you don't know who you are, right? And in indigenous culture, you would have been supported through teachings and ceremonies in starting to learn who you were when you were becoming a young man, right around puberty. So that's a condition of the patriarchy, is that we're separated from ourselves. And I think it's worse than that. I think there's been a deliberate, systematic efforts to separate ourselves from who we truly are. Secondly, separation from each other, right? And we all know that deep longing for connection that we have with each other. And I was talking to you earlier about when you feel the loneliness I've been feeling, you think everybody's but you is in a couple and doesn't. But that's not true. Even in couples, people are isolated and alone and separated from each other. And I think part of that is because of the myth of romantic love, but that's another pin for another conversation. You know, the ways in which we approach male-female relationship in the patriarchal culture, as opposed to the ways in which an indigenous community or a collective, and I'm getting into a bit of detail there. Third part of separation is separation. We're separated from all of creation. P.K. Shepherd, in a book, Nature and Madness, said that in an agrarian village, people had relationships with 20 plants and animals. So by agrarian village, we can talk about the patriarchal, the European culture, the way things are, maybe modern North American culture, like how many plants and animals were you in relationship with growing up in Kingston, and I suspect that it was not even 20, right? I could be wrong, but I'm guessing, right? But then in hunter-gatherer / indigenous society, people were in relationship with an infinite number of plants and animals. That is to say, all of creation. And then that last piece of separation we talk about is the unseen world. And we are separated from, I don't like to use the word God because it's limiting. There is a lot of scientists now talk about other dimensions and multiple parallel universes, but indigenous people have an active, reliable ability to communicate with ancestor spirits, with people that have died and gone before, with spirits that I don't understand. I don't do what can I actually say that I know people that can communicate with the great mystery that some people would call the creator. That's a big claim. I don't think I can say that, but there are voices and intelligence and other in the unseen that indigenous people, and you've experienced some of this with me, not me doing it, but routinely, reliably work with. And that lack of separation, I think, is we have to consider all four of those as we consider ensuring the continuity of life. Or even, ensuring the continuity of life. We want life of human beings. I want human beings to continue, don't you? I want some version of this earth as we know it to continue. People say to me, the earth is going to be fine. And I go, yeah, but it might only be bacteria. And I'm not really down. I'd like to try to do the best I can to ensure that we have some version of this that survives this crisis that we're in. Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
I just want to add that piece.
And so then maybe we'll move on to, I think a lot of the things, if people are listening to this, a lot of the things we said might trigger some pessimism.
I
Like
was just saying the same thing. Yeah.
A lot of people, they hear hunter-gatherers and they say, oh, we can't just go back to that. There's too many people or whatever. They have an excuse for why that won't work and why none of this will work. But I think our point is there is a way.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And it's not necessarily returning to exactly how things were before, because we can't go back in time, but there's definitely things we can learn from the past about how to move forward.
Agreed. You're pausing like you want me to talk.
Yeah.
Is that true? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't.
Yeah. No, there's a couple of things. So there's a couple of things. First of all, is let's just talk about what indigenous people do or did, and an indigenous worldview. There's laws of science, there's laws of physics, and then there's something we call natural law. And there's natural law, and there's a lot of what we would call, we mean Indigenous Anishinaabe people, or because that woman said I shouldn't be calling myself Anishinaabe, I've gotten a little sensitive. I was totally comfortable doing it till I had lunch with her. A lot of what Indigenous people would refer to as natural law is about you said balance, living in harmony with nature, or natural consequences. And so there's a lot of what the the patriarchal or dominant culture has started to figure out in the last 50 years that supports this, right? Like you need a, a diverse ecosystem. You need a lot of biodiversity. You need things that work. So a lot of indigenous people say, I don't want to go back and live in a lodge. I don't want to live in a wigwam. I don't want to live in a tent. I want a house. Well, we're saying, cool, have a house, but have that house built with materials that aren't hurting the Mother Earth. Heat and cool that house in a way that isn't hurting the earth or other people. Eat food eat meat. I mean, you've been a vegetarian, but like I don't have a problem with eating meat, but eat meat that's ethically grown, where they're in an indigenous way. People would pray and would say that animal offered their body up, the spirit of that animal offered the body up for people to be used because that's their job. That's sort of that one in and of itself is going to cause trouble with our vegan friends. But my point is that it does not mean it is literally impossible in here in Southern Ontario to live the way the Anishinaabe lived 200 years ago. There's too many people here today. And even, let's say we're going to reduce the population dramatically over time. I'm not down with ethnic cleansing personally and genocide. So I'm saying we got to work with what is. And maybe the universe is going to greatly reduce the numbers of people on the planet, but we can work with where we are. We can live according to that natural law. We can heat our buildings. We can cool our buildings. We can generate our food in a way that's balanced and in harmony. There's a way out. There's a way out of the mess we're in, and there's a way out of the mess we're in, starting where we are. We may have to make changes. We may have to. I'm sorry, my nose is really itchy, guys. I'm going to stop and just sort of do that. We may need to make dramatic changes to the way we do things, but I believe we can, because I believe in the infinite ingenuity of human beings. I believe in the intelligence of the spirit in the universe. And to sound really hokey, but on a Sunday, I believe in the power of love.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Does that answer your question about pessimism?
Yeah. And obviously there's more details to that, but so there are obstacles kind of in the way of creating that. I'm thinking about government structures and stuff like that. And now, yeah, kind of making it a little bit difficult to make that transition to being in balance. And maybe we could talk about what this strategy is for getting around that.
Sure. So what's really interesting about the climate change crisis is that 2015 was a big year. There was a sea change. There was everything. I don't know what everything changed, but in my world and in this place they call Canada, everything changed in 2015 for a couple of reasons. One of which is we had the Paris Accord that year, which affected everything globally. Secondly, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, Truth and Reconciliation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report released with its 94 recommendations, which I think anybody living in Canada should read. The 94 recommendations. I think you live here on the country that the only reason you have the quality of life you do is because what the first peoples had done to maintain and take care of their responsibilities in this place for millennia. And at least have the respect to know who was responsible for the bounty you enjoy, right? What the heck. But in any event, one could argue, and then you had a very clever politician in the form of Mr. Trudeau, who knew exactly what things to say to get elected, he has, he hit on the climate change, and he hit on Indigenous, and he said all the right things. So even though his subsequent behavior has proven that he is not sincere in that, even though his subsequent behavior has proven that he's no more honest a politician than anybody else, even though he's got great hair, it is, here I ummed again. The conversation changed because he changed the conversation. That's thing one. So I'm going to come back. I haven't forgotten the strategy. I'm just talking about that historical context. The question was, what is the strategy? The second thing that is so that the conversation in this corporation they call a country called Canada, and that's another pin for us to come back to. Why do I call it that, and why I don't call it a country? The conversation became more about nation to nation and Indigenous rights than it had been ever before. It had been growing, the whole residential, Stephen Harper's apology, but Indigenous resurgence in this country has had a different kind of relationship with the state than it has elsewhere. And the fact that in this country, there is the Indigenous people. Our cat has joined the podcast. My cat has joined the podcast. You guys can't see her, but you may be able to hear her purring.
I had a cat walking around too earlier.
Yeah. They're important parts of the conversation. You want to say hello to the people? You just want me to love you. That's Mira, guys. You can just see her peeking into the screen. She'll be in and out of the screen because she's not really much down with photobombing, and she just wants to sit in my lap and get stroked. I haven't forgot where we are. So we're talking about the fact that we had that Indigenous framework, that Indigenous lexicon, Indigenous resurgence and rights has become part of the conversation in Canada in a way that's just not going away. Thing three is, or maybe thing two, is that 10 years ago, sustainability was defined as, so I started out by saying as the climate change creates interesting stuff. 10 years ago, sustainability was defined as the incremental reduction of stuff. I was told this by the director of the Canadian Urban Institute, Amanda Smith. I ummed again. And she said, now with the recognition by every nation on the planet that you need to not only take carbon out of to not only stop putting carbon into the atmosphere, you need to take some out. There's a recognition that cultural transformation is required, that it's not just incremental change on sustainability. I haven't forgotten the question, Paul. I see your face looking pained. I haven't forgotten the question. I know where we are. The point is there's a convergence in this place called Canada of Indigenous resurgence being recognized and supported by the public and by funders, and the conversation around cultural transformation allows for a conversation about cultural transformation. So that creates openings to do things that have not been possible before. So we can talk about the barriers, which is what your question was. How do you deal with the barriers? And I'm saying that the people in charge, to quote another friend of mine, have opened the door just a crack with them saying we want to support a post-carbon economy, just a crack to say we want to support reconciliation, and that it's our job to drive a Mack truck through that crack. And I haven't really answered your question, but I'm giving you the larger context of what, setting the stage to answer your question about the strategy. That's like, setting the stage and saying, here it is. We've got Indigenous resurgence happening, being supported by increasing numbers of the Canadian population with support from people that have money. We've got a conversation around climate change. And then the third thing, which is, that's it, is you guys, your generation. We've got the numbers of your generation. We've got the same bulge in population that was there in the 60s. There are more people, more young people alive now than there have ever been before. So we can do stuff now that we couldn't do before. So let's get this party started. Does that answer your question? Was that a decent answer to what you were trying to do?
Yeah. Yeah. So we're at 45 minutes.
That's probably a good place to start. Let's get this party started.
Yeah, let's get this party started. I think we opened up, or we got a big picture, and then so next time we can fill in more details, and we'll keep filling in details until, uh, well, I'm pretty sure we'll always have details to fill in there. But yeah, sounds
Let's get
good
this
to
party
me.
started. Yeah,
All right.
and so that's good. But I really want to just, in closing, just before we finish off, is that there is a glimmer of light right at the end of the tunnel, and and I know it's not a train. There is some hope here, and the most important thing is what you said, is that it's got to start with our own selves, right? Is to just to start to tap into whatever that thing is, and to start to feel okay and breathe into it, and then we can go on from there. And then yo tribe up. I mean, we never answer that question really, but
Yeah.
coming together with other people is the key. We can't do it by ourselves, but we can do it. We can do it. We can make a change, right? It's the
Hmm.
11th inning or whatever the inning is, or 12th inning, the 11th hour. I'm not a, there's definitely, is definitely the,
Bottom of the ninth, I think it is.
yeah, or like it's like in one of those holiday movies where it looks really bleak, and it looks really bleak because it is, but I say there's a hope, and I think I know how to do it, and we're going to share that in upcoming episodes. Is let's make a change because we can.
Hmm. All right.
Thanks for hanging with
Yeah.
us. If other people are watching, thanks for doing this, Paul. I'm cheating glitch. I'm really excited. It's
Yeah.
great.
Thank you. This was fun.
Uh,
All right. Cheers.
take care.